Seeking to reshape U.S.-Africa relations, President Joe Biden hosts Kenya's William Ruto for a state visit and declares the East African nation a major non-NATO ally. So what's driving this effort to strengthen ties, and what does Kenya and the African continent stand to gain? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Washington rolled out the red carpet for Kenya's President William Ruto this week. The two countries are marking 60 years of diplomatic relations, and they're promising to strengthen those ties, starting with security cooperation. President Ruto reiterated his commitment to sending 1,000 police officers to help restore order in Haiti. The visit is also important for broader U.S.-Africa relations. Washington appears to be playing catch-up on the continent. China has invested heavily in infrastructure in numerous African countries, and Russia has increased its military presence in West Africa after a series of coups in recent years. So, can Washington fulfill its new promises, and how could African countries benefit? We'll discuss all this with our panel of guests in just a moment, but first this report from Dmitry Medvedenko.
It's the first official state visit by an African president to the White House since 2008.
To Kenya, to our guests.
Washington is designating Kenya as a major non-NATO ally. It joins the ranks of Israel, Australia, Qatar, Brazil, and 14 other states. With the honorary title comes the promise of deeper financial and military cooperation.
That's a fulfillment of years of collaboration. Our joint counterterrorism operations have degraded ISIS and El Shabaab across East Africa. Our mutual support for Ukraine has rallied the world to stand behind the UN Charter. And our work together on Haiti is helping pave the way to reduce instability and insecurity.
President William Ruto has secured investment worth $250 million. Washington will also assist in alleviating Kenya's foreign debt, 2/3 of which is owed to China, Africa's biggest trading partner.
We agreed on the significant opportunity for the U.S. to radically recalibrate its strategy and strengthen its support for Africa, as discussed at the U.S.-Africa Leadership Summit, by enhancing its investment in the institutions of African integration and increasing support for peace and security.
America's footprint on the continent has shrunk after a series of military coups in recent years. Since seizing power in July 2023, junta leaders in Niger have ordered first French and then U.S. troops to leave.
We have agreed that this withdrawal will end on the 15th of September 2024 at the latest.
In their place, the generals have welcomed Russian troops and stationed them at a U.S. base. After the Wagner group of mercenaries was incorporated into the armed forces last year, Moscow is now openly increasing its influence in Africa. And it's received a warm welcome in Niger, where it's pledged to help fight armed groups.
The terrorists are killing our soldiers. We've never seen a Frenchman nor an American fall on the battlefield. It's only Nigerians who are dying.
With Africa increasingly critical of Washington's unconditional support for Israel in its war on Gaza, President Biden is trying to win back some points.
They share the belief in freedom, democracy, dignity, and equality.
With a traditional song and dance. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's now bring in our guests for today's show. Stella Agara is a governance and security analyst who specialises in youth development. She's joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. In Washington, D.C. is David Shinn, a professor of international relations at George Washington University. He's a former American ambassador to Burkina Faso and Ethiopia. And also in Nairobi, Nicodemus Minde, a researcher with the East Africa Peace and Security Governance Program at the Institute for Security Studies. A warm welcome to all three of you. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Stella, if I can start with you. So the first state visit from an African leader to the U.S. since 2008. William Ruto is being feted in Washington. They've rolled out the red carpet for him. How is this being viewed first in Kenya?
I think that there are mixed reactions to this visit. There are Kenyans who, of course, have been focusing on some of the issues that they've been trying to address with the government, including the need for austerity and reduction of foreign trips, which our president has been doing very many of. There are Kenyans who feel that there's a possibility that some of these trips could mean that we are going to incur some more debt. And so they were a bit worried about that and how it would impact on the general sovereign debt. But then, of course, there's also reactions from people who realize how big this kind of a partnership would be. And so they were looking to see what kinds of opportunities would come out of this. What is the US putting on offer? What are we going to have to cede in order to receive what they've given on offer? And then looking to see at the other geopolitics. How is this positioned around the state of relationships with China, the niche that China has cut for itself in Africa, especially with the investment in infrastructure, as well as which other neighbors are we going to upset in the commitments that you're going to make with the US. So there's a lot of mixed reactions to this.
Right. And we'll delve deeper in some of the issues you raised there. And I also wanted to find out from you, Stella, what Kenyans are hoping that the president brings back when he returns. But let me bring in Ambassador Shinn to the conversation now. Ambassador, designating Kenya as a major non-NATO ally, highly symbolic, but what does it mean practically? There are many issues that are more important to African leaders, like getting a permanent seat on the UN Security Council or perhaps restructuring global financial institutions. What will this designation change for Kenya and for Africa in general?
Well, the one tangible thing that it changes is to allow Kenya to purchase certain kinds of military equipment from the United States that would not otherwise be possible. Otherwise, it is primarily a symbolic measure, but it's only one of many measures that are being taken during the course of this visit. I don't think it's the most important development in the visit so far. I think some of the economic issues are far more significant than this one.
Yeah, and one of the most important developments also being that Kenya has again reiterated that it will send a 1,000-strong police force to Haiti. Haiti is on President Biden's agenda, Ambassador Shinn, but not on William Ruto's. Why is the U.S. not committing troops when Haiti is in its backyard?
Well, the United States is committing a great deal of funding, $300 million so far, in order to support this multinational mission, which will be about 2,500 troops in total, or policemen, 1,000 of them coming from Kenya. So the U.S. is, you're correct, is not providing any forces, but it is providing a great deal of the funding.
Nicodemus, your thoughts. What are the geopolitical ramifications of Kenya's decision to send these 1,000 police officers to Haiti, all the way to the Western Hemisphere to help with the unrest there? And this is happening as, of course, there are crises on the African continent that Kenya could be helping with. Is this a strategic move by Kenya? What will it get out of this?
Well, it's not just about the African tragedies that are being experienced that Kenya could assist, but also there are questions also being raised to the level of insecurity in the country at the moment. And questions are seriously being asked about Kenya's role in sending these police forces to Haiti. Or us, on the other hand, we find the country is experiencing a lot of insecurity in many parts of the country. So there's a great irony in all that. So there is also a lot of concern amongst Kenyans, not just about what Kenya could have done on the African continent, but of course, why is it not Kenya also focusing on its internal security, which is also a big problem at the moment?
Yeah, quite surprising, Stella, to many people in Kenya that the country is sending troops all the way to Haiti when Africa has no shortage of security needs to be met. Is Kenya doing the Biden administration's bidding here?
One of the biggest issues that has been brought up around this is whether or not this is just being done as a motivation to receive resources. And especially after the declaration that there are resources attached to this assignment, there are very many Kenyans who had very many other questions that they were asking around the safety of these officers. Number two, about the fact that we have not even reached our quota of the ratio of police to citizens in our countries. We still have a lot of policing needs, and yet we then are offering this kind of service abroad. There were questions that were raised about the training and capacity of the police officers coming from Kenya to offer the services that are required in Haiti. Some of this has been addressed, and there have been attempts to address this through providing training to the police officers. At least 100 of them went to the US for training in between November last year and now. And hopefully they have acquired the right skills. And the government is also trying to convince Kenyans that because they are drawn from the RISK squad, they are drawn from a rapid deployment force, and they're also drawn from a special operations group, that they have the kind of skills that are required. These three groups have consistently been used to fight terrorism, to address extreme violent situations. And so it is hoped that they'll be able to address the situation. But then the other question that Kenyans are asking is, we have a very corrupt police force. We have a very violent police force that responds to unrest with a lot of violence. And Kenyans have been asking whether this is the attitude that is going to be brought into Haiti, and whether it will work in their favor or it's going to be detrimental to their existence there. I should mention that there has been a delay in the deployment.
Indeed, because there's been a lot of debate around this issue, hasn't it?
There were supposed to be around 200 boots on the ground as of yesterday, but then the flight was delayed. The reasons why the flight was delayed have not been mentioned. So, of course, there's also a bit of jitters about why the hesitation. Is it an escalation of violence in Port-au-Prince, or has it got to do with something else? And Kenyans would really like to know what is happening. This has also been stopped by a lot of litigation along the way, most of which the government has attempted to address through different process, including the signing of bilateral agreements with the government, the Transitional Presidential Council in Haiti.
Ambassador Shinn, what would the US be telling Kenyans? I mean, if it were in a position to do so, to reassure them that this police force that's being sent to Haiti is needed, and how important is Kenya and also Africa to the US's national security outlook?
Well, Kenya is important to American national security interests primarily in the Horn of Africa and East Africa. Haiti is something of an exception, and is somewhat unusual to have police go so far from Africa to Haiti. But I should point out that the United States is also engaged in the Horn of Africa in support of both Somalia and Kenya, to combat the Al-Shabaab terrorist organization. We have about 400 American troops in Somalia. We have a military facility in Kenya. All of this is aimed at trying to disrupt the Al-Shabaab threat, which very much impacts Kenya as well as Somalia. So there's a security relationship that extends into the Horn of Africa and East Africa that I think is important for Kenya too.
Nicodemus, your thoughts about what Ambassador Shinn said there. How important is this security relationship as far as Kenya is concerned?
Well, Kenya has always been a very close security ally to the United States, and this particular engagement between the U.S. and Kenya is basically a very strategic one, bearing in mind Kenya is very well geostrategically placed in a region that has oftentimes been very turbulent, be it in South Sudan, Sudan itself, Somalia, and Kenya has oftentimes played a critical role in peace mediation, conflict resolution. But of course, there's also a lot of security threats, including what Ambassador Shinn has mentioned, including terrorism. And Kenya has also borne the brunt of terrorism attacks. And historically, Kenya and the United States have actually been collaborating on issues to do with combating violent extremism and terrorism. So this particular trip by President Ruto and the engagement with the US and President Biden is to also foster more security ties, especially bearing in mind that Kenya is actually an anchor state in the region. So it plays a vital role in terms of that geostrategic engagement.
So some strong security ties that both countries are looking to strengthen, you say, Nicodemus. Stella, what about on the business side of things? What do Kenyans hope President Ruto will bring back when he returns from this trip?
Kenyans are definitely looking forward to trade deals. They're definitely looking forward to different kinds of investments in different sectors, and there have been voices mentioning very many sectors. Of course, they're looking to see Kenya positioned in a way that then would improve the economy compared to what has been happening in the last couple of months. Kenyans are hoping that the kinds of investment that will be injected into our economy will give them some reprieve from the tax pressure that they have been experiencing. But the other thing that Kenyans are also hoping for is to continue enjoying the kind of status that they have enjoyed economically in the region. You would know that Kenya has been very influential in trade in the region. In the East Africa community, Kenya has also been very influential, and some of that ground has been ceded in the last couple of years. And definitely Kenyans will be looking to see how we'll regain ground based on the different opportunities that are going to arise out of this negotiation and future negotiations. I think Kenyans are also critically looking to see how best can we engage in a manner that is going to provide employment and jobs for different people. So whatever opportunities that the president is going to be announcing on his return, they'll be looking to see how those translate into jobs and disposable income into the pockets of the citizens of Kenya.
Okay, so some very strong ties, as we've heard. And Ambassador Shinn, as you said, Kenya very central to US-Africa relations. And I'd like to broaden the discussion now, if we can, to US-Africa relations, because there's been a bit of criticism of the Biden administration. President Biden didn't keep his promise to visit the continent during his first term. So was this visit by the Kenyan president to Washington and the rolling out of the red carpet for him, is that a way to make up for his lack of engagement with Africa?
Well, I think that is part of the reason for this visit. I think it was unfortunate that having said he would visit Africa in 2023, and that did not happen. I should point out that some 24 cabinet-level officials have visited Africa during the Biden administration, but that still does not make up for a presidential visit. I don't think we should attach too much importance to a presidential visit. It's what the substance is of the relationships between the United States and each individual African country that ultimately is going to be more important than a one-time visit by the president. But I don't want to understate the importance of a presidential visit either.
There was also, Ambassador, the US-Africa Leadership Summit in 2022, which saw a lot of African leaders travel to Washington, and a number of promises were made then by the Biden administration. Were they executed? Were those promises followed through?
Well, it's always difficult to document exactly what happens after one of these summit meetings. Certainly, some of them, I'm sure, have not yet been implemented. Others, I think, have. A lot of them depend upon the American private sector in terms of foreign direct investment in Africa. And the degree to which those have been implemented, I frankly can't tell you the dollar amounts. My guess is that there have been some disappointments in that regard. But foreign direct investment is dependent upon the American private sector. And if you can't get them to engage, there's not a great deal the U.S. government can do about it, except offer more incentives to engage, which I think the visit by President Ruto is trying to do in Washington right now.
Nicodemus, your thoughts about this? How does this visit help the U.S. re-engage with Africa, not just in terms of quantity, perhaps, but in terms of quality? What should Washington be doing now to counter growing Chinese influence, as Stella mentioned, but also Russian influence on the African continent?
I think the U.S. should be a little bit worried about the level of diminishing influence that it is having in the continent. A recent Gallup poll has shown that China and Russia and other mid-range powers are actually gaining a lot of ground in the continent. And maybe to answer Ambassador Shinn's question is actually, you find that you're able to gauge or measure the level from the December 2022 US-Africa Summit is such indicators such as the diminishing role the fact that other major powers are catching up with Africa. And another example is the role played, if you look at the Sahel, for instance,
right.
There's a lot of trouble in terms of US's influence in that part of the world. But that notwithstanding, for sure, the United States has really tried to really engage the continent. Last year, we saw the visit of Vice President Kamala Harris in several African countries. Of course, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has made numerous visits to the continent. But of course, Africans also want to see tangible results in terms of infrastructure, in terms of health, of which this particular trip by President Ruto, there are a lot of commitments and promises that are going towards not just health,
right.
agriculture, climate change, and all the other development issues. So it is quite a welcome move.
A welcome move. Ambassador Shinn, let me just ask you about some of the challenges that perhaps one of them that best captures the challenges that the U.S. is facing in Africa right now, and that is, Niger. The coup last year changed the nature of the relationship between Washington and Niger, and we've had the Pentagon confirm that American troops, those left in Niger, will be withdrawing by September. How does the U.S. balance security partnerships today in Africa with democratic values? How does it make sure that it's not taken over by Russia and China on the continent?
Well, you put your finger on a real dilemma for the United States, which does operate on the basis of various human rights principles and a support for the rule of law and democratization, Western-style democratization. So when you have in the Sahel region, as we have recently seen, military coups, where in the case of Niger, an elected government has been overthrown, that runs contrary to everything the United States believes in. We even have laws on the books that prevent everything except humanitarian assistance to continue into such countries. So this is a dilemma for the U.S., there's no question about it. I would simply point out, though, that when you have a country like Russia stepping in and providing small numbers of troops, basically offering a Praetorian guard to the new military leadership, I'm not convinced that this is a long-term recipe for success for Russia in this part of Africa. This is a part of the continent that has had many coups. Things will change again someday. And where will Russia be when that happens?
Stella, your thoughts about what Ambassador Shinn just said there and this dilemma that the U.S. is facing in Africa?
I view this from a very different perspective. I am very keen on the interests of African countries, on the interests of self-determination by African countries. And a lot of the African countries are currently rethinking how they have been engaging with different partners. Unfortunately or unfortunately, this is happening at the same time when there's a scramble for relationships, especially from the Western partners with the African governments. And this is why the US finds itself in competition with their strategic rivals like Russia and China. African governments are looking for a friend in need, especially after the recession that followed the COVID pandemic. And they're also looking to provide survival or sustainable livelihoods for their citizens. So the person or the entity or the government or the collaborator who's going to negotiate in a way that looks beneficial to African governments is actually going to gain favor. Unfortunately, that has thrown everything into the air and everything is up for grabs. Obviously, the US had advantage in terms of relationships with different governments in Africa, and so they are at a defensive end. And of course, they have an opportunity to improve some of those relations and make them better or strengthen them in order not to lose the niche that they had, which is what I think the US is attempting to do with Kenya right now. And of course, China is digging in further, Russia is digging in further, and each one of them coming in with different goodies. But of course, there's a lot more that goes into deciding who then becomes a collaborator, who becomes a partner. And I believe we must very carefully, even in this conversation, balance the weight of the interests of African governments while we're also talking about the interests of Russia, China, the US, and any other players who would want to come on board in this conversation.
Nicodemus, your thoughts. How do we balance the interests of everyone, and which partnerships is most beneficial to African countries today? It's not just, of course, China and Russia, but also we're seeing Turkey, the GCC region, express growing interest on the continent. Which of these partnerships is most beneficial to Africa and African people, not just the leadership? And how does Africa balance these different interests?
Well, sure. You find that most of all these different global powers offer different development interests. On one hand, the United States has historically been a great development partner to the continent, without a doubt. If you look at the eastern part of Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, in terms of health provision and other related issues to do with malaria, HIV/AIDS, climate change, the United States has been a great development partner. On the other hand, we have seen in the past 2 decades, the Chinese have come with a lot of funding, where they fund a lot of infrastructural projects, which again it was welcome. And of course, they had a policy of where no strings attached. But on the other hand, we also see the rise of other mid-range powers, the Turkey, that are also offering a lot of development partnership in countries such as Tanzania, building railways and the like. India is also another growing partner. Indeed. So Africa has different number of development partners, and each of all these big powers offer different dynamics of development assistance.
All right. Ambassador Shinn in Washington, D.C., I'll give you the last word. What does the future hold for U.S.-Africa relations, and what happens if, come November, the Biden administration is no longer in power? What happens if a Trump administration is back in power in Washington?
Well, the Trump administration did not show a great deal of interest in Africa. Certainly President Trump himself did not. The various parts of the bureaucracy remained very active on the continent. But I think that Africa will do better with a Biden administration in the future than it will with another Trump administration.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you for a great conversation. Nicodemus Minde, Stella Agara, and David Shinn. Thank you. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thank you for watching. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.